provide everything. I bring the theology, you bring the ice cream. So anytime you want to bring it by, feel free. I am very excited to say that I did get an additional contribution to my ice cream making ability. I got a second mixer. Wow. I look really quick. Basically, it means I can make 2 batches of ice cream at once in my ice cream maker, and that means now I can expand my possibilities, both in having multiple flavors, but also some mixes. I'm very excited to see what turn this is going to take in coming times. So here we are. That's right. Where are we? Where are we touring this time? Well, I started streaming on Twitch, and all along I'm like, I should probably do something a little bit more, gaming. Gaming? That's not the right word. Game-ish? Gameable? No? But when I play games on my computer, it's usually me trying to escape from the world, not trying to interact with the world, so I apologize for my introversion. Gaming. I don't like multiplayer games either for that reason, but I did find something. Some of you will recognize this from tours you may have had in your own experiences and times you spent adventuring. I used to be an adventurer like that person until I took an arrow to the knee. So now I teach theology, and come what may. So, here we are. I'm talking about the church. It's a kind of a funny thing to be talking about, I know, because it's one of those things that everyone's vaguely familiar with, and even if they're not familiar with, have a lot of opinions about, and some good, some bad. Oh, I'm echoing, huh? Uh-oh. Why would I be echoing? Let's see here. Echoing. I get the music thing. The music's kind of a grand a little. Maybe the music's too much. Am I still echoing? Why would I be echoing? Hold on while I try this. Is that better? The music is louder than me. That's dangerous. Okay. How's that? Let's see. What is my default microphone? See, this is the kind of thing. So when we're talking about church, we're talking about community. And the thing with community is you can tell. Still echoing. Still? Ooh. I'm now hearing. Where's the echo coming from? Let's see. Somehow I'm getting 2 microphones going on here. Echo. How's that? Can you hear me? Am I still being heard? Are we... What's going on? What's going on? I am hearing music and your voice is echoing. Better! That's what we go for in life. Better. Can we have perfection? Some say yes, some say no. But if we can hit better, we've hit a sweet spot of life. How are you doing? Better! See, do that every day. You're on to something. Better. All right. So apparently my microphone was on, as well as my microphone being on. So I was being picked up in multiple ways. Dare we try to have some ambiance music again? How's that? Anyone? Still echoing? Are we still echoing? Better. No? Still echoing? Turn off audio. No echo here. Okay. All right. I don't know. Facebook sometimes takes a while to update. So sometimes it seems to like give me 4 comments and then it stops updating. So maybe I'll just read some old comments here and reload. Ah, yes. Nice. Okay. So where are we? We are in the magical land of Skyrim. Northerners dwell among many abodes, wandering the fields, adventure, occasional mayhem, handling rebellions, dealing with different species, races, all the rest. So it seemed for some reason when I thought, I'm going to talk about the church. We talked about the Grand Canyon, very dramatic music. Is the music still loud? Because I don't hear it. Let's see. Overriding beautiful music. Okay. The music is a bit louder than your voice. Well, that can't happen. Let's check my... Good. 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 How does good rank in terms of better? Better is better? Good is good? Let's see if I maybe... Sometimes you just have to check. Let's see. I feel like maybe I have too... I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. What am I doing? Who am I? Where am I supposed to go? Open sound settings. Manage device properties. How's this? Whoa! I think I got it. That should increase my volume. Yes, 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 yes. These are the kinds of things where I know I'm turning off all my potential viewers by like, doesn't he have anything interesting to say besides, talking about volume? But look at my background. See, now isn't that majestic? Is that not in the, that's just, who wants to live there? I wouldn't mind living there, except for the battles and adventurers and wild beasts and other things. You need a good sword to live there, I think. And I am missing a good sword. I have cheap swords, but I don't have good swords. Okay. So where were we in this cavalcade of... Cavalcade? Is that a word? I think it's a word. I don't think I used it right, though. In this journey. I always think I'm like, all right, I'm on track. I'm everything's ready to go. I'm going to get into my office early. I'm going to get started. And then I realize, yes, needed running a separate sound check before real start time. That requires, anticipation. But the funny thing is that I check it and then it ends up being something weird. So, because I'm not hearing what you're hearing. So it's just interesting. So I need to start early and do that. Okay. How's everyone doing? Everyone surviving the weirdness and the craziness? There's a lot going on in the world, and I feel there's this part of me that wants to talk about what's going on, but there's another part of me that realizes there's a lot of people talking about what's going on. My voice is lagging and chaotic. Let's see. Lagging and chaotic. That's not what I'm going for in this world. It can be tricky, right? Because things that worked exactly... I didn't change the settings this week. I think maybe, I updated the computer with some different things, and I think maybe that messed things up. All right. Well, we'll press on and see what happens. Shall we press on and see what happens? Life is tricky, right? All right. Too much video stuff going on? I don't know. Am I trying to be too much? I don't know. Where were we? We're talking about church. Speaking of lagging and chaotic, how about the church? Is that a chicken? I think there's a chicken in the background. Where's there? Whoa, he's trying to hide. There he is. There's a chicken. Who sees the chicken? What other kind of animals can you spot in the background? There's a wood mill there. It's such a nice little village, but there's a guy with a shield in the background. What's he doing? Why do you need a guy with a shield? So are there dragons? There might be dragons. You think we're going to see a dragon? There's that chicken. Oh, there's someone else. What's he have on his back? Nice chicken. All right. My voice isn't keeping up with my visuals. Interesting. Here, hold on. We're doing something bad here, and I don't know what it is. Okay. How's that? It's like everything that I did and set up before is now wrong and disorderly and no longer. All right. We just need to jump into things. I'll check things along the way. I keep getting distracted and then wondering what I'm doing. That doesn't help anything. All right. Transformative Community Church is a transformative community defined by love, participatory. It's transformed, meaning that people are changed. Hopefully, it's not just static, and it's also affecting the people around them. Hopefully, in good ways. Whoa, no. That did everything wrong. Back to echoes. All right. Shucks. I'm just going to sit here and stare. Delay, no delay. Default microphone, all right. How about that? Delay, no delay. Microphone mono mix. I don't know. That's something. Did that do something? This whole system's falling apart. I'm kind of feeling like my stream here is just getting a little too 2020. That's like the new phrase when things just start falling apart and you're not sure why and they just keep getting worse. It's really gone 2020. So feel free to quote me on that. All right. Speaking of snow, were we speaking of snow? There's a nice snowy scene back at the village. Don't change anything. All right. Great topic, but isn't working, as said on Facebook. All right. 2020, right? Here's to a better second half of 2020. All right, church. How do we do something that's participatory, transforming? What are we oriented by? We have to have right beliefs, and that's unfortunately where too many people stop. As long as you have the right beliefs, you're in. That misses most of what the Bible talks about. Right beliefs is fine, but that's only a part. What do you do with the right beliefs? Do you actually believe the right beliefs? The whole goal of what we're trying to do in this whole streaming thing is saying, this is what the Christianity says it is, but is it? Is it really what's being expressed? Is this what most Christians understand? And so my goal is to try to bring in some discussions to help us maybe think again about what it is we're trying to do here, who we are. Right beliefs is good, but you also have to have right feelings, right passions, right desires. I call it orthopathy. It's not original to me, but it's not as commonly used. What does that mean? Well, the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, long-suffering. All those things become expressions. What if the church pursued peace throughout its history? What if the church expressed patience? Too chaotic now. Oh, man. All right. Well, hopefully the recording's doing good. But we can't just stop with right thoughts, right feelings. I feel so much peace and, love. We have to do something about it. We have to enact it. But there's also wrong actions. There's wrong things we can do. We can't say, I have the right beliefs and I'm going to act whatever way I want. I think that's part of the problem of our current society is so much of history has been this trying to enact it in wrong ways. We have the right idea of what we should do, but then put the wrong methods, and then chaos results. So there has to be something more to it than that. Christian theology and the Christian life has to be attentive to the way of Jesus in the power of the Spirit. That's where I ended last week. Christian theology and the Christian life, so the church, which is, I think, fundamentally where these things come together, has to be attentive to the way of Jesus. What's the way of Jesus? In the power of the Spirit. So, here we're going to throw some good stuff at you. Here, you're like, does he really have a PhD? He's not really acting like it. There's Skyrim in the background. He doesn't know how to do audio. It's all kind of a mess. What do we do with this? All right, I'm going to throw some polysyllabic words at you. Are you ready for this? I suggest we should consider the overall approach to church an ontology of transcendent immanence. See, that'll get you some nice looks from your friends. An ontology of transcendent immanence. Now, if I was a real jerk, I'd just move on from there. Like, right, who would argue with an ontology of transcendent immanence, right? So what do I mean by that? Am I just throwing some words out there to try to impress, all my friends and family? Maybe. But that's not, of course it turns dark right then. A nice fire cavern. Transcendent immanence. We find our true being, ontology. So what's ontology? Our being. As we participate with God's transcendent, God is above and beyond and out there in the context of our present. So, an ontology of transcendent immanence means that we become fully who we are as we are living in light of God's vision for this world in our situation we're at. Transcendent means beyond, immanence means very present. So we're trying to live out, rather than say, I am whatever the winds are blowing me, however the current society, I'm being defined not by the whims of the moment or my own impulses. I'm being defined as a full person by God's vision of what it means to be me right now. Who am I? Who gets to define that? The society around me? Have you seen society around us? I don't want those people defining my whole sense of identity and being. Because what happens next week when society changes its mind and decides on something different? People are blown back and forth. They're like ships that have been unmoored and are being tossed around the waves. How do we find some kind of steady sense of identity and meaning and value that isn't dependent on other people's judgments or other things? Well, we go to the source. We find our meaning in what God is doing, who God is, but not so that I'm distant from the world, so that all that meaning and depth means, well, how should I then respond to the coronavirus? How should I respond to the discussions on racism? How should I respond to the time and energy constraints I have? How should I respond to all the questions of society and my family and life? All those questions bombard me. And where do I find answers to that? How do I find consistency? How do I find peace? And that's really what this ultimately is about. How is it that I'm going to find ultimate, profound peace in who God is, who I am, what God is doing, and with others? Now that's that last part that's tricky, right? I can be okay between me and God, but get those other people involved. It's a mess. Because you've seen people, right? Have you watched the news? There's people everywhere doing things that I disagree with. I don't know why they keep doing it, but they do. You can pick and choose who those people are, right? But we're bombarded and our emotions are taken control of. We lose our own ability to be really free because we're always being pulled and jostled and co-opted. We can separate from people, but that's not the answer because we're communal. So what do? We have to find what it means to be true to ourselves in the context of other people. We can only be fully human in the context of other people. So we find our meaning in the context of interacting with people. But then it brings that whole problem of people again. So our identity isn't lost in others if we establish ourselves in who God is and what God is doing, but rather we become full and hopeful in the relational presence of others. I don't really know who I am unless I'm in the context of interacting with other people that expand, speak into my life. I speak into their life. And in this, we reflect what Jesus was calling for. A messianic community, of people who are living out the calling of Christ in our specific setting so that the teachings, the miracle, the salvation, all those things of Christ resonates more and more and orients us to be in tune with what God has made. It's very people-y out there. So, that's the problem, right? It's very, there's people everywhere. And if we try to control, we're going to be upset. If we try to run away, we're going to be found by them. They keep showing up everywhere I go. And if I try to somehow make it so that I am avoiding them, it doesn't happen. The only way that I can find and navigate this world in peace is to have some kind of resource and orientation that starts me in a place of peace. I'm not dependent on their reactions, but I'm bringing a wholeness into the context. And that, I would argue, is what the church was intended to be. A place where people, in the midst of chaos and concerns, could find a place of peace, of hope, of reminders of who we are to be. What does wholeness mean? We reinforce, resonate with each other. So that in this place of restoration and renewal, we find a peace that then we can be sent out and bring that to the rest of the world. We talk about the message and gospel, but these words, but so often the words about Christ we bring are accompanied by chaos and hurt and pain. And people hear those words and they say, that's not really what I'm looking for. What are people looking for? Peace, community. What are the things that are being wrestled about in our current society? Welcoming. People don't want to be rejected based on factors that have nothing to do with who they are in their deepest part. People don't want to be recognized by certain traits we have. We want to be accepted. We want to be recognized for who we truly are. We want to be free from danger. We want to find healing. We want to find hope. We want to find welcoming. We want to find encouragement. We want to be valued. We want to be listened to. We want to be encouraged, not rejected. We want to be empowered, not stomped on. We want to be included, not separated. These are deep, deep human longings. We want to trust others. Where do we go that we can truly be in a place of trusting others? That is a deep, deep human longing. So deep of a human longing that when Jesus came, he didn't say, okay, here's the answer, now do it on your own. He said, here's the way. You got to do it together. You got to be involved in this together. And we make all the rules and details and all the other things. And we lose sight of the fact it's fundamentally about finding a place, even if it's just one place, where we can be together, trust each other, interact with each other in a fruitful, empowering way. Is that what you think of when you think of church? Sadly, no. For many of us. Some of us, and I'm one of them, have gotten glimpses of this at times. Glimpses, moments at which you realize this is what it means to be alive in the context of others. And why has the church so often failed at being that kind of place? That is the question, isn't it? Because there's just so many different answers. I would argue it's because we lose sight of our core calling. We lose sight of that core message of the law, which starts with the idea of love God and love others. And we put that as like oh yeah, that's good, but what we really need to do is this thing, or we need to do it in this way. And it's so easily lost, that emphasis on love, trying to perform for God, or trying to earn our way, or trying to satisfy something that we make everything else, the people around us, secondary or worse. And in doing that, we think, oh, Jesus is going to come alongside, and Jesus is saying, you missed the main point of it. And when we miss the main point of it, we slide off the trail. So there's a lot of reasons, and that's the challenge, right? Because what we're talking about here is not just here's all the things we should do, but how can we be attentive to the ways we might be pulled aside? What are ways we were pulled aside? Now that's a very individual question, right? The trouble with people is people, and the trouble with people is we all bring our mess into this. So the reasons we fail is because we all let our messes become a dominating form of our interaction. And the early church was very careful. They said it's going to take a long time to be involved in the church because we want to make sure that people who are part of this know what they're getting into and have an understanding. And so they had like a year-long what's called catechesis of training, and then they'd let them be more involved. It was actually very hard. Now we're so easy, we're almost like desperate, right? Please like us, anyone come. So no reason wonder we get people who have all sorts of different motives and goals. And then you had the power issues early on, where you had these leaders who at first were those who were the exemplars of faith and courage and trust and sacrifice, and then it became a way of power and wealth. Well, that leaks down, and suddenly money and power and all the ways the world defines success becomes part of the church. And what does the church have to offer? These nice spiritual language, but no real transformation. You have the same classes and ranks. Racism, slavery, all those things were aspects of the early church, I would argue, was very much pushing against. The idea that anyone could have different ranks and value that had any fundamental meaning was something the church rejected. 1 Corinthians 11, that you go down the list of there's these things that the world defines us as, and the church said, no, those don't count anymore. But then later on, the church said, oh, those do count. We have to be attentive to those because we don't want to be weird. We don't want to be weak, right? Because we don't trust God. The problem with the church is we don't really trust Christ. We believe he did a nice thing, but we need to do all the other stuff to make sure his mission and vision gets taken care of. And so we don't trust that people can have less than perfect understanding and still be accepted by Jesus. We don't trust that you can have people of different backgrounds coming together. We fall back into our traps. I mean, that's a long conversation there. What goes wrong? Well, any kind of sin comes in. Well, do we have hope? I would argue we do have hope. I would argue the fact that our hope, I'm going to throw some more words at you, is defined by the idea that God has done a thing in history. So we're defined by what God has done. Our being, our message, our hope is also about who God is and helping us to be. So a historical ontology. We're defined by what God has done. Not phenomenal history. Not phenomenal here. I'm not saying, that great history. I'm like phenomenons. I'm getting real philosophical here. I'm like, tone it down, Patrick. We're not defined by what has happened in world history. We can't look back and say, well, the church is progressing. People are getting better. You think people are getting better? We've always been fooled by that. Every time we have this sense that people are really on track and getting better, what happens? People show that we're barbaric and horrible and awful. That people will take the slightest chance to be horrible to each other. I'm sorry. That's just what people do, and it happens again and again and again, and will no doubt and is happening even now. If we don't think that, we are extremely sheltered. But we're not looking for those things to be defining for us. We're looking for God's work. So our hope that there can be something better in community, we can have a horrible history with church. We can say, man, that was messed up, and still have hope that God is doing something. I've had that experience. I've had experiences where I'm like, this is just really empty and blank. And then God shows up and brings groups of people, and we find this fruitful conversation. Even when you think, well, there's a lot of better churches out there that are doing all sorts of fancy stuff, those churches may not have a kind of deep community, even if they're good on the surface. But those deep communities can happen in very curious places. And that's what I'm trying to talk about. It is pretty. Thank you. My mom is complimenting yes, it is. It's beautiful, right? Theologian Jürgen Moltmann, my guy, suggests a framework. Now, he uses this to talk about Scripture, but I really like this. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this discussion this evening, and probably carry on next week, is it is a good game. The visuals are amazing. I found this video with just the visuals. I'm like, wow, that's good stuff. So Jürgen Moltmann suggests a framework. So the rest of this discussion on church, I'm going to give you some of my ideals. A lot of this stuff I've been talking about has reflected some of the things I believe. I've tried to give you sort of a discussion of different things. This is where I'm going to say, here's what I am really trying to work for in my own life, in my own setting. It's not easy, and it's not always direct, and sometimes I get discouraged, and sometimes I get passive. But if you want to understand what is Patrick Odin's vision of what the church could be like, here we go. And I know you were wondering about that, right? So here's a framework. I think there's 8 parts of this. So we shall take our bearings from the following guideline. We shall work out what in the text that Scripture furthers life, and we shall subject to criticism whatever is hostile to life. Now I'm going to change that a little bit. We shall work out in terms of our community life whatever furthers life. And we will subject to criticism whatever is hostile to life. I love this because it changes the conversation about church away from all the specific, things we argue about. And the things we argue about are often absurdly the very things that are supposed to bring us together. But isn't that humanity in its essence? The thing that's supposed to bond you becomes the thing that everyone argues about. What if we were to say, what brings life to our community? Let's do that. What is negating life in our community? Let's fight against that. And that will be our vision of what it means to be a community together. Well, what does it mean to what is life, right? This is where we go back to that orthodoxy. Well, we're talking about life in a certain way. There's a lot of different discussions about what makes a life in full and where we find our meaning and purpose. Well, we're bringing to the table a specific pattern of insights and claims, and you can disagree with that. Bless you. I mean, there's a lot of different versions of this, but in light of where I'm coming from and what Christianity comes from, I think it's a good contribution. I think it's the truth. It's not just a good contribution among many. I think it's true. You can disagree with me. That's all well and good, but even then, my goal will still be to say, how can we together celebrate, empower life? Because that is what Jesus did. He came back from the dead to give life. God loves. What is love? Love is this expression of life for the fullness of others. Let's do that. And let's fight against things that crush that. I think that's a great framework. Now, what does that mean for a Sunday service, right? This is where we start maybe our very patterns of worship, of discussion, of all these things are themselves flexible based on what gives life and what takes away life. How can we be people who encourage life in others, who work towards the fullness of life of others? I think that's something. So, 1, the way of life and hope. This is I'm calling the way of life, my understanding of church, the way of life and hope. I know this is me sort of dancing off the normal pattern here. We're talking about I believe in the church as we go through the Apostles' Creed, and I'm throwing a definition of church out here that is it's a little like jazz, right? I'm riffing off the theme of church by playing a little bit of a tune of my own here, but I think it's actually following the chords better than a lot of what organizations that call themselves churches do. What furthers life is what ministers to the integrity of human life in people and communities. What do I mean by that? Well, first we start with what is integrity with God. And if you want to know what I mean by that, go back to all the things we've talked about previously. We talked about creation. We talked about the rest of this stuff. What does it mean to have integrity with God? We live according to how God created us, how God created the world. Maybe not this world you're looking at. Where is that world, right? What does it mean to have integrity? It means, I think I use the analogy of games even in my discussion on creation. It means living according to the rules of a given universe. Skyrim. Skyrim? I always say Skyrim. Is that right? I don't know. How many hours have I played it back in the day? A lot. What does it mean to have integrity with God? God created our universe, so we're called to have integrity with that. It may not match with what we initially think, but we're not the ones in charge. So first, integrity means having integrity with the Creator who loves us, so wants the best for us. Doesn't mean in having integrity because he's a horrible, dictator. He actually wants the best for us, so I'm going to trust him on that. What else? What is integrity with people? What does it mean to have integrity? Skyrim. I wonder what part of my language background makes me want to say Skyrim. Skyrim. I think you're right, Skyrim. What does it mean to have integrity with people as individuals and as a community? Integrity is one of those words that's thrown out there a lot, but is a little mushy in practice. Integrity means being true to ourselves, faithful, honest, trustworthy. Do we have that? How about as a community? Do we have integrity as a community with people? Does our church body or community people have integrity with the world in our context? Or is it this little separate piece that fits into something but doesn't? It's like a piece of a puzzle from a completely different puzzle. Right, you have like a scene of a mountainy scene, for instance, and then you have like a toy store puzzle, and it's like putting the toy store puzzle on this mountain scene. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit piecewise, and the colors don't fit. Integrity is having the pieces all fit together so that there's this bigger vision of something working together. How do we then develop and encourage integrity in the context of truth and love? That is the challenge. So when I talk about the way, I'm not saying, here's the rule book and gives you all, go down the Q&A and go down all the list of things, the things you should do and shouldn't do. It really is challenging because life is challenging. People are challenging. They throw things at us. We throw ourselves at us, right? How do we develop and encourage integrity in the context of truth and love? So often, and I would argue this defines a big split in a lot of church communities. You can broadly say conservative versus progressive. Some say we go at truth and we're going to be iffy on love. Some say we're all about love and iffy on truth. How do you can't have integrity with these separated. So how do we have integrity with truth and love? I would argue this is what Jesus exemplified. And it wasn't because he was this huggy, happy person. He could be very brutal, but he was speaking truth out of love. Love with truth. And there's something about that kind of posture that says, I want the best for you. How do we celebrate together the best? How do we find the best? Even when we disagree about what that is. How do we encourage it? How do we develop it? Again, this is a different task than being, a lot of the things that churches do. How do we actually say, I want the best for you? How can who God made me to be help you be the best you in full? How can someone else I know say, you know what, Patrick, I like what you're doing there, but you're really off track in this area. Am I willing to hear that? Am I willing to have people speak into my life? And because they love me and because I trust them, they can point things out in my life that I need help with, that I might even disagree with them about. Because I trust and love them, I'm like, all right, I'll listen to them. Imagine if we had those kind of communities. Where else? So some suggested practices. How do we do this? We're going to be a little practical. One way of doing that is this is coming from a book that I really looked into, some missional church stuff. If you don't know what that is, Google it. Merging ancient and contemporary Christian spiritualities. Ancient and Christian. I love what C.S. Lewis said. Of course I'm going to quote C.S. Lewis at some point in this. He talked about the importance of old books and reading them, because he said, when you read old books, we're very aware of where that era has gone wrong. But we're not as aware of where our era has gone wrong. And so we can be blind to our own mistakes. We can be blind to our errors in a way that's going to be understood 100 years from now. But when you read old books, you actually can pick up truths and pick up reminders. Oh, we've forgotten to do that. Oh, that's a deep journey. Oh, these people had a lot of more time to spend wrestling with some things that I'm too frantic and busy to deal with, and they're really giving me a roadmap. A lot of my own personal spiritual renewal came not in reading contemporary books, but in looking back at early Christian writings and say, man, this was a depth that I missed in my own church life. They reminded me what it means to be not just a Christian, but to be a scholar, and reminded me what it means to live out this life, not in isolation from the world, but in participating with it and being willing to put up with a lot of struggle and still seeing God in it. What does that mean? It means I need the wisdom of people who have been on this journey before. But that's not to say that they knew everything, that they had it perfect, that what we really need to do is go back to the 4th century or the 2nd century or the 13th century or the 19th century. Heaven help us, let's not go back to the 19th century. Because even though they did some things well, and you'll hear that in a lot of popular church, back when they had prayer in schools. Well, they also had racism in schools, right? We can't look back and say there was an era in which we had this beautiful moment, but they ignore the problems of the moment. And in our era too, we tend to we're focusing on a lot of the problems, but we do some things good, right? So we need to wrestle with contemporary realities too, as a way of understanding, well, what is the Spirit teaching us? There's things we're not blind to now that they were blind to 150 years ago. Finally, right? We're awakening to the idea that maybe God really does love all people and wants us to gather together without social separations. Right? Maybe. Of course. And so there's something that we need to understand. We need to learn from the past, but not be so caught in the past that we are ignorant of our present and useless to the present. And in that we find discernment. What does it mean to have integrity as people? We need perspective. I love this quote from Ignatius of Antioch. He said, "Wake carefully the times. Look for him who is above all time, eternal and invisible, yet who became visible for our sakes, impalpable and impassible, yet who became passible on our account, and who in every way suffered for our sakes." Weigh carefully the times, look around us, but be oriented by God who is above and beyond the time, so that we don't get caught up in the muck and the mire. We don't get so caught up in the weeds, in the chaos of the moment, that we lose heart and discouraged and then don't know where to go. We might be walking through some very difficult paths, but if we have a map, if we know that there's some way forward, we'll be able to press on. So this involves listening too. We can't just be people who speak, who always are jabbering. We actually have to listen to what those around us are saying. How can we have integrity with people who we don't listen to? How can we have wisdom in our own life if we don't listen to people who God has given us to give wisdom? How can we understand the present moment if we aren't able to hear the cries and the joys of people? If we're listening, we become aware of this world around us, and we begin then to hear as we're supposed to hear, and then the Spirit, we say, works in that, becoming a new kind of people. So we have to listen. We're so quick to talk. 2, how are we doing? What furthers life is whatever ministers to the integration of individual life into the life of the community. How do we include people in our community and the life of human community in the warp and weft of all living things on earth? Now there's a phrase, yes, torture chambers from Skyrim. Yes, but isn't that how life is, right? This flashback to times and seasons. Let's go outside again. Sometimes we have to remember that people are caught in beautiful places, but other people are caught in torture chambers. How do we bring the people out of places of torture? See, I'm pulling the screen. The scenery is not just for visual; it's also to give me some tools to work with. How do we bring people into a place where people who are lost, people who are outsiders, people who are discouraged, people who are broken, find a place of renewal? How do we bring them from a place of darkness and constraint into a place of freedom? Around the hearth, around the place where they're warmed, around the place where they're fed. How do we give people a sense of welcoming? You're welcome here. What do you want from me? I want you to be full. I want you to be whole. I want you to have peace. I want you to feel love. Do we want more than that? Well, this is where we can't, if we're between two demanding, I want you to do this, do this, do this, do this. That's not love. That's transaction. And a lot of community is built on transaction. The church shouldn't be built on transaction. The church community should be an expression of genuinely wanting the best for each other. And that's hard to do because I don't always want the best for myself. So I have to become the kind of person who allows that conversation to take shape, which is vulnerable, right? But we don't just do this in a community. We also say we're part of an ecology. I love the theme of ecology as I think about human society and spirituality. We think of ecology as the gathering of plants and animals and weather in a certain place. And when you live somewhere, you don't really know a place until you know the native flora and fauna. Now, there's a lot of introduced plants. So living in a suburb, you don't always know around. I think that's why I like weeds, right? Weeds are that's a horrible name, right? Weeds. Yeah, ecology. What weeds are telling me is these are the plants that are going to grow in a place whether you want them to or not. Well, what does that say? It actually is telling you about the place you're at. What are the birds in the area telling? They tell you about the kind of atmosphere you have, the kind of weather. The fish in the river or the sea tell you something. All the different kinds of things you see are telling you more about the place than a study guide would tell you. You learn by watching what kind of animals you have. And if you don't know that, you don't know a place. It takes a long time to know that too. And knowing a place isn't just knowing the big features, the buildings, the other thing. It's knowing from the big to the small because everything's acting in order with each other. The big things need the little things, the plants, the animals. There's this interactivity of interdependence. And it's not always pretty because things eat other things, right? And those plants with the long thorns on them. It's not pretty, but they're telling me something about a place of survival, of weather, of so much more. And that's how we have to exist as a community. So what should a church be like? Well, where do you live? One of the problems in study of the house. Yes, right. Ecology, study of the house. I love that. What kind of house are we living in here? What is this like? One of the difficulties of the missionary movement, when we talk about the modern missionary movement, we talk about missionaries in, especially late 18th and 19th centuries going off to other places, spreading the gospel. And in a large way, there was this wonderful work of God. And I have Christian brothers and sisters all over the world who celebrate this. It's not a European religion anymore, really. But a lot of how they did that was very unfortunate and caused barriers because you'd have these missionaries from, say, the Northeast from Boston, and they go to Hawaii and they say, well, what church is like is you wear heavy wool coats and hat, and you speak in this way, and you have a church building made of wood. And the Hawaiians are like, All right, but have you been in Hawaii? It's just not. Hawaii is warm. It's hot. There's a different kind of weather pattern. Wool makes sense if you're living in a winter in Boston. It doesn't make sense if you're living in Hawaii. And it certainly doesn't make sense if you're living in summer Sacramento, right? Which is where I live. Church should take on an expressiveness of the context in music, in patterns, not being co-opted, but existing in a way that resonates and has integrity with the context. How should you dress to church? Where you live? What is something that would help your outfit not to stand out, but to allow you to participate in an environment in a way that brings... I have read James Michener's book, Hawaii. Yes, I have. That was a side fact of me. One of my favorite authors in high school was reading almost all of James Michener. So I am a huge James Michener fan, and I give a thumbs up to other Michener fans. So, yes, very shaped by that. I don't know how much, but I've also done other histories. But yes, James Michener book Hawaii is exactly that, right? And to go into college and read theology and church and read this contrast, it makes you think, right? So what's your favorite Michener book? That's a question you can't ask anyone. Centennial is up there. Centennial, or what's the one about Maryland? Oh man, my mind is going blank. Such good books. I should start reading Michener. It's an investment. I never did homework in high school, but I read Michener. That says a lot about me. So integration involves liberation and inclusion. What does it mean to have integration of individuals in the life of the community? You can't integrate someone into your community if they are being... Ooh, Chesapeake, yes! You get like 5 points and an extra gold star for not just being a James Michener fan, but having the titles. I was thinking, it's the name of the bay. Too many threads going on. Yes, maybe I like that because that's like the one that doesn't start the source. Oh, the source is good. Such good stuff. Yes. I'm very sad, and this is my Michener, but this is also, I'm going to tie this together, so watch me. I'm pulling Michener back into the very conversation. So James Michener married a Japanese-American woman in just after World War II, which shaped a lot of his own understanding. He has this very California experience. I think he may have lived here for a while, but he never wrote these grand sweeping historical geological epics that tap into a whole region and give you this wonderful insight. But he never wrote about California, which is so sad to me as a multi-generation Californian. He said he didn't because he could never get over the way that Japanese were interned during World War II. And it hit so close to him how these people were treated, the way they were excluded and minimized and dehumanized, that he couldn't celebrate the state through one of his novels. And it's just sad to me. And there's really no getting around the fact that there's this truth to what he says. And we have to be better than that. How do we become people who live out not exclusion or dehumanizing, but we empower, even if there's a risk to us? Now, one of the great things I love, my family history has a lot of mixed stories, and it's, going back so many generations. One of the things I'm really proud of is the fact that my grandfather and my great-grandfather were farmers. During World War II. My great-grandfather Odin and my grandfather on my mom's side were farmers during World War II, and both of them had Japanese neighbors who were interned. And much of California, they were put in these camps, and a lot of people don't realize this was racist, but a lot of it was because Japanese were great farmers and had really thriving land, and they were really horrible, awful people then, as in now, who really wanted the land. And so they used the politics and the racism to get what they wanted. So these Japanese would be taken off. They wouldn't be able to support their land, and so would lose the land and sell it for dirt cheap. And these people would take up all this land. My grandfather and great-grandfather had Japanese neighbors who were taken to these camps, and rather than take advantage of them, they spent the war farming their land for them, so that they were able to maintain their the land and pay. They saved the money, and so after the war, when they came out, they had the land that was still thriving and returned to their families. An era in which there was just a lot of mess and complications and evil done with some really, patriotic sounding language. I can look back and say that was right. That was furthering life and ministering to the integrity as a community. And I think that's something that I say, that is it. Liberation and inclusion. We liberate those who are broken. Yes, Kevin Starr did the Great California Histories. Yes, if you haven't read those, very good stuff. I started finally reading those and then got sidetracked because I have like 3 jobs now. Why do I keep having more jobs? I don't know. Okay. So we have to help people find freedom, but we can't just say, now be free. That was like the post-Civil War problem. Now, let's free the slaves, and then they stopped there. If you didn't add inclusion, you allow dysfunction and brokenness to come back into the story. So integration of others means including them as Jesus includes them. Who does Jesus love? Who did Jesus die for? Who does God love? Everybody. So who do we include? I'll let you answer that. Liberation has a lot of meanings. So it doesn't just mean liberation for social problems. It also means liberation from the compulsions of sin. Because we're not just trapped by our social status, we're also trapped by our own addictions. We're trapped by our own, and that could be the classic addictions of alcohol or drugs or go down the list, but it can also be addicted to status or addicted to fame or addicted to money, or addicted to performance, or addicted to this or that. There can be very things that are very socially acceptable but that drive us. We can be addicted to Facebook, right? We can be addicted to streaming theology discussions. Well, not everything's bad. Liberation from the idols of power. Pax Christi versus Pax Romana. Throwing some Latin at you. Man, you're getting your money's worth here. This is good stuff. Liberation from idols of power. We are defined and make other people's defined by who they're finding as power. Politics, companies, go down the list. We think if we align ourselves with the right power, we're going to get reap the rewards from that. And then we isolate ourselves in communities of people that fight over that, and we other people. And sometimes we other people who are othering, and it's like when I did a long study of liberation theology and the history of Latin America and so on. And what I realized is far too often people don't actually want change and equality. They don't actually want freedom for all people. The great majority of people who are talking about liberation really just want the power. They want the people in power to lose it, and they want the power so that they can be the ones in charge. If you disagree with me, I ask you just read history. That is the cycle of history. It's not the underclass gain power and now everyone's free and happy. It's this. Everyone flips back and forth. Because what we really want is just to be the ones in charge. We like the system as it is. We just want to be the ones reaping the benefits of it, and other people to be paying for it for us. What Pax Christi, so that's Pax Romana, a peace built on the sacrifice of others. I get peace, you have to, deal with all the consequences of that. But as long as I'm happy, who cares about you? That's not what Christ is offering. That's not what the church isn't about, a community where it says, as long as we're at peace, other people can suffer. The church is about reflecting the peace of Christ. What is the peace of Christ? We talked about this when we talked about the cross. Jesus died for the sake of others. He gave us peace. He took the burden of the peace he gives to us. He didn't say, bear the burden so that he could have peace. He said, I'm going to bear the burden so that you can have peace. What would that mean as a community? How could we bear the burdens of others so that they have peace? Well, that has a lot of implications, right? Financial. Go down the list. identifying with the God-forsaken, including them with the people of God. Rather than identifying the people who have it all and saying, I want to get whatever they can offer, and maybe if I can bask in their glow, I'll be a little glowy, and people will say, "Ooh, that's a good guy there." Or we can, speaking of things that are inappropriate, statues of idols are probably not the most appropriate thing in this discussion. But this is a contrast, right? Pax Romana, this brokenness, the empty stones, the lifelessness of it. Let us be an agent of your peace. Amen and amen. How can we be people who at every step say, how can I be a peace bringer to this situation? Sometimes that means helping others breathe. Sometimes that means actually calling out evil. Peacemaking is not passivity. It's not just keeping the peace. It's saying if there is a kind of destructiveness going on, I need to address that. If there's someone who's causing chaos for everyone, sometimes you need to have that person stop. My dad, who was here knows this as a teacher, and one of those lessons I've learned, sometimes you have a small group of people who are just causing chaos, and the only way to bring peace to the rest of the place is to find a way of getting them out of the room, because they're not interested in peace. And sometimes that means just letting other things deal with it, because you can't force peace upon them. And if they're fighting against peace, what does that mean? That the church has historically included violence in this, and I don't think that's always necessarily the case. But how do we navigate so that we call out evil and chaos and say no and say yes to peace? How do we be an agent of transformative peace, not passive peace? It's rough, because when we see hurt or pain, we really can easily be co-opted into the tools of the world again. And a quick way to put a stop to chaos is violence. But then that introduces its own pattern, and it becomes a cycle. And that's not what Jesus did. So there's a challenge here. So we have to find ways of expressing Jesus in formative structure. What does that mean? How do we express the life of Jesus in contexts and situations that actually can bring change? So while I am against the idea that politics is our answer, I also would say politics is a way that we have in the United States of bringing change. So we should be involved in politics. We shouldn't we shouldn't make politics an idol. We shouldn't say politics is the only way, truth and power, and if the right person doesn't win, we're just hopeless and we have to be full of rage. No, we say politics is a path and one of our many things we can use. And how do we express Jesus in our politics? How do we express Jesus not just in our national politics, but maybe we should be involved in local politics? How should we express Jesus in different kinds of community aspects? It's not by staying in the church. Jesus ministered outside the church. How do I know that? Well, look what Jesus did, the Gospels. Jesus didn't stay in the temple and say, everyone come to me, and if you come to the temple, you'll hear me. He went out in the streets, and where Christ is, there is a church. More Latin for you. Ubi Christus ibi ecclesia. Something like that. My Latin's pretty poor, but where Christ is, there is a church. What I love about the book of Acts is the book of Acts was the story of the foundation of the church, but what was the church doing? The Spirit kept working, and so often the church was a place that people met, but it was also, the church kept happening, and the disciples kept having to catch up to what God was doing, where Christ was meeting a eunuch, an Ethiopian eunuch on the street. Christ was going to the centurion. Christ was going in all these places in the power, through the Spirit, and the church said, okay, I guess we're going there. So what does that mean for us? It means going to the place where Jesus went, that Jesus would go and have us be the presence of Jesus in that situation, be the kind of presence that Jesus forms us to be. Who did Jesus seek to help? That's right. Who did Jesus seek to help? Let us go there. We're not Jesus, but we're not isolated individuals. I can't save the world, but what I can do is participate in a community that together can be this kind of presence in my neighborhood, each in our own way. Freedom in Christ means being free with and among others and seeking freedom for and with others. I love this idea of freedom, not cheap freedom. I get to do whatever I want. You can't tell me what to do. But this idea of freedom, of being whole and full of joy and full of peace in the context of others. There's something, it doesn't mean like I get to do whatever I want. There's a lot of things I may want to do that causes other people irritation. I know. Shocking. You're like, Patrick, now what could you do that's irritating to people? I know, but I imagine there's probably a couple things people could think of that I may have done. And it's like marriage, right? What does it mean to be really free in a marriage? It's not that Amy is just having to be my slave. It's really that I'm learning to live with her and for her in a way that we're actually experiencing more of life. And part of that is me finding a freedom of activity with her, but it's also me finding a freedom of discipline it's learning how to live together so that our freedom is much, much more than just me satisfying whatever selfish whim. That is not freedom. That's actually its own kind of slavery because I get trapped in my own self. So where is Christ present? Who did Jesus seek to help? Well, that's another way of asking that is, where is Christ present? How is Christ present? We read the Gospels, but we're not limited to the Gospels. Because, remember, go back to what we talked about the ascension. The ascension was Jesus saying, I'm going back to the Father, but I'm going to send you the Spirit so that this message, this messianic mission, can continue in all the places you're at. And Jesus now is present wherever the people are living out the way of Christ and the power of the Spirit. And that should be what the church is. That sometimes is what the church is. That's how I would define what the church really is. But a lot of things that get called church aren't doing that. And we need to remind ourselves, whatever, and not be critical. I don't have to say, now let me point the finger at all these people who are doing it wrong. No, that is actually getting myself distracted again. What I should say is, how can I be someone who lives this out? I'm not the judge. I'm not the one who is going to be in heaven looking and say, well, you did this, and this wrong. Quite the opposite. Jesus is going to look at me and not say, well, did you have the right opinions about what the other people were doing? No, he's going to say, did you live out your calling in your context as I have asked you to do? That's what it means to be faithful as a person. That's what it means to be faithful as a community. How can we be this presence? Liberation of self. We anticipate community. So I have to find wholeness in myself. I can't just put it on the backs of others and make other people. I actually have to find, what does it mean to be free? That means freedom from sin, continually growing, continually assessing. Church as an anticipatory community. What do I mean by that? We should say, this is what we should be like. We should be living in a world that's free of sexism and racism and go down the list of other sins. We should be living in that life. Well, what does it mean to have that community? We're not there yet. We're still dealing with the trials and frustrations of the world, but we're not stuck in the present. We can actually say there's a better way to do this, and it's not idealistic, even if it's hard. The church is a narrating community then. That means we tell the story and remind each other of the story of this is what Christ did. This is who Christ was in the early church. This is what these great leaders, remember when I said there are those moments where the church really lived out what I'm saying? Let's remind us of those. And remind us of what happened when the church got off track. Remind us of who we could be, who we're called to be. Remind us of what our history is and our history of our region. What's the history, for instance, of Sacramento? What is the call that of the community we could be, as opposed to the community that we might become because we've become too fractured? Sacramento, for instance, is an extremely diverse community. There's a beauty in diversity. There's a wonderfulness of people from all over the world and all sorts of different cultures and histories coming together and finding this community. But that also is a source and reason for division and isolation among those communities. So you could have both this possibility, but you can also have this hurt and isolation and dehumanizing. So how do we become a community that tells the story of peace and hope? Some ways of doing that is just do it. When I talk about prayer, I say the best way to pray is to pray. Well, the best way to consider community is to commit to this kind of community, to actually live in it, to say, I may not want to, but I'm going to keep doing this because this is what Christ has called. And when there's problems, be willing to address those. Don't overlook them. Don't be shallow. Be willing to say this is what's truth. There's an inward and outward stream of mission. We have to remember the story in our community. We have to remind ourselves, if we've gone wrong, what the right path is. We have to continually keep the narrative of Christ in us. But we also have to resonate this around us and say there's peace, world. The answers that the politicians or these other fractured groups or people are trying to do are just spreading their own chaos. But how can we be people who say there's a better way? And not just in words, actually say there's a better way because we're experiencing this ourselves. Inward means sanctification. How can we be people who are more in tune with God? How can we be people who are transforming the world so that they become people who experience God's peace? I think that's a good vision. When I think of church now, you'll realize I'm not talking about what happens on a Sunday morning. That's all just like extraneous to me. I don't honestly care, which is a funny thing for me as someone who specializes at a church to say that. I don't really care about what happens on a Sunday morning. I think it's not unimportant, but I don't think it's as important as has been shaped. We could do almost anything on a Sunday morning, but if you're missing these aspects of transformative love and deepening community, you're missing what the Spirit wants. But if you have those things, you could just get to hang out and have coffee, and you can do whatever you want, really, within reason, and be finding this deep growing community. That's why community can happen online. That's why I experience community with students at times. This is why there's this deepening community, and that can happen so many different ways that if we try to give our narrow vision and make that it, we can lose the whole. All right, 2 down, 6 more to go. We've gone over, but hopefully that's been helpful. We'll continue my understanding of the nature and my hope for the church. I have a lot of hope for the church, even as a lot of criticism. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for those of you who are here, who are, I may not know in person, but you've joined me in this journey. And thank you especially to those who are people who are in my community, near or far, who are sharing this time, and know that I really appreciate you. Let's keep doing it.